This week on Capitol Journal, a farewell here in Montgomery for Senator Richard Shelby, who is retiring after more than 40 years in Congress. More leadership positions are getting filled in the Alabama House of Representatives. We'll have the latest. Karen Goldsmith reports on innovative education techniques in Talladega County that could be a model for the rest of the state. Randy Scott is back in Selma to show how the restoration of Brown Chapel is opening doors to more tourism in the Black Belt. In studio, I'm joined by outgoing House Clerk Jeff Woodard and incoming House Clerk John Treadwell to discuss all the turnover in that chamber. ADECA Director Kenneth Boswell discusses the state's efforts to expand the electric vehicle charging network. And David Mowery talks about recent elections and what takeaways we can learn. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. There was a who's who gathering of state and local leaders in the capital city this week to honor U.S. Senator Richard Shelby as he prepares to retire after more than 40 years in Washington, including 34 years in the United States Senate. As a member of the Appropriations Committee and once its chairman, Shelby has built a legacy of directing billions and billions of dollars worth of funding and projects back to Alabama. Those projects include the deepening and widening of the Port of Mobile, bringing world-class biomedical research to UAB, expanding Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville to include a new FBI headquarters, and expanding the engineering programs at Auburn University and the University of Alabama. The tributes rolled in for Shelby at a packed ballroom at the Renaissance.
When I look at the footprint of Richard Shelby around Alabama, he has made such a difference in so many different areas. But there's one thread that's common to all the things that he's done, and that's Alabama.
It's not what I did, it's what we did. We did together, a lot of people, because we have to work together. We have worked together in a bipartisan way. We need more of that up there. Terry Sewell and I worked together. Martha Roby and I worked together. Katie Britt, I felt like I worked for Katie Britt, when she was my chief of staff and so forth. But Alabama, our state that we care a lot about, is on a roll, folks, right now. We got to keep it that way, though. Alabama's open for business. This is a chamber promoting business and all, jobs, opportunities. And look at the low unemployment. There's some counties that we need to keep working on, that are challenged economically and socially, and we've got to do this. We owe that to the people. But we've got low unemployment, and we got to tell people all over the world that we're open for business. You can do business here. Montgomery is an example of that. What you've brought into here. Not what I've done, but what you've done.
House Speaker-designate Nathaniel Ledbetter this week announced his selections for top committee chairs in the Alabama House of Representatives for this next term. Chairmen play a key role in the crafting and movement of legislation in and out of session. Representative Danny Garrett of Trussville will retain his chairmanship of the Ways and Means Education Committee. This is the panel that oversees the Education Trust Fund, the largest of the state's budgets. Chairing the Ways and Means General Fund will be Representative Rex Reynolds of Huntsville. This is a change, as Representative Steve Klaus previously chaired General Fund. Klaus unsuccessfully challenged Ledbetter for Speaker. Representative Joe Lovern of Auburn will chair the Rules Committee. This committee sets the daily agenda for the House floor and has a lot of influence over what legislation does and does not move. And finally, Representative Jim Hill of Moody will retain his chairmanship of the House Judiciary Committee. This is an especially busy committee because it deals with all criminal justice legislation. Chairmanships in the Senate have not yet been announced. It is unclear whether or not charges of sexual abuse against a former Alabama lawmaker and political activist will go forward. Perry Hooper Jr. last week was indicted by a Montgomery grand jury on one count of felony sexual abuse. He was arrested in August after an incident at Ravello Restaurant. in which he allegedly groped a female employee. However, this week, the alleged victim, who originally pressed charges in the case, publicly asked for those charges to be dropped, saying she appreciated the police department's action, but she just wanted a public apology from Hooper. The Montgomery County District Attorney's Office on Tuesday acknowledged this request, but did not say whether or not it would drop the felony case. Chief Deputy District Attorney Azzie Taylor said that the prosecution would step back and assess the facts and evidence to decide whether to move forward with the charges. Alabama won't seek another lethal injection date for Alan Eugene Miller, whose September execution was halted because of problems establishing an IV line. The state agreed in a settlement to never use lethal injection again as an execution method on Miller. Any future executions on him will be done by nitrogen hypoxia, a method that was recently authorized in Alabama, but that has never been used. In related news, attorneys for another death row inmate are alleging the state violated the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution during his failed execution attempt. A court filing for Kenneth Eugene Smith claimed that the inmate was subjected to, quote, ever-escalating levels of pain and torture, unquote, on the night of his failed execution, when prison staff worked for over an hour attempting to find a suitable vein for lethal injection. The Alabama Department of Corrections is not responding to the allegations, citing ongoing litigation. Governor Kay Ivey last week ordered a moratorium on executions and a review of protocols after the state continued to have problems carrying out lethal injections. Talladega County schools are using innovative ways to make learning creative and more fun. As Capital Journal's Karen Goldsmith reports, it's a model the rest of the state could emulate.
Years ago, we read a book called Shaking Up the Schoolhouse, and it really showcased how education needed to change and become more in the 21st century.
She says they use project-based learning, which gives students a real-world perspective on solving problems.
For example, at one of our elementary schools, the students worked with the local city council to develop a plan for refurbishing a local park. Some of their suggestions were actually implemented with the refurbishment of the park.
And students at a Talladega County high school are building tiny houses.
That is a workforce development need as far as plumbing, electricity, design, drafting. The students are learning all of those skills. And once the tiny house is completed, they take that to market. Last year they sold it for $50,000.
Their building science students gutted and refurbished this former school bus to become the ZIP, which stands for Z-Space Immersive Playground.
They put flooring down, they covered the windows with sheet metal, painted the inside, ran the wiring.
The ZIP contains 14 Z-Space units that allow students to virtually dissect frogs, look at the solar system, and even examine the human heart.
And this is actually one where you can simulate putting electrodes to do an EKG on a patient. So this will actually be used with our health science classes.
Wow.
I think that it provides students with some voice and choice in how they prefer to learn. Also, we feel like Z-Space utilizes technology that our students are already familiar with. It provides them with real-world learning in the 21st century using technology that they're probably engaging in at home.
And so it will be stationed at different schools for a few weeks at a time, so teachers can bring their entire class out and have that experience versus maybe just doing a demonstration because of lack of materials. So it will really be a great way for teachers to engage their entire class in these experiences.
For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
Randy Scott returns to Selma this week to continue his reporting on the restoration of Brown Chapel AME Church. The project is sparking talk of more tourism opportunities for Selma and other parts of the Black Belt.
The multi-million-dollar renovation project at Selma's national landmark, Brown Chapel Church, continues, but it's also given birth to other projects, mainly a new educational facility.
To see, to touch, to be touched by all of this, we'll be able to have just a heavier imprint, a stronger touch, a more even indelible impression upon visitors to this area.
Pastor Leotis Strong says it will bring new life here and creates an educational black belt region to help tell more about this area's historic past.
Some of our past customers and clients were universities and colleges and law schools. I can see them in the study of those things that motivate and bring them to here in the first place, wanting to spend a 2-day conference here in this facility, reviewing some of the artifacts and mementos.
On this day, tourists from as far away as England are here seeking historic lessons.
I've come here a number of times, so yeah, I mean, we just love the history, so I've come to bring my new family here and see the history as well, Martin Luther King.
We need history that, you know, our children and our children's children can come and see from all around the world. I think it's such an important piece of history that wherever you're from, you should definitely come here to see.
Yeah, and we inspire them to come back when they're older.
And bring their kids.
A positive move, according to some project consultants.
Us having, being able to maintain, perpetuate, preserve this facility, us being able to hire a full-time curator, to help present interpretive educational presentations to those tourists and visitors.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Governor Kay Ivey lit the official state Christmas tree on Friday. This year's tree is a 40-foot eastern red cedar from Bullitt County. As per tradition, the theme of the lighting was "Every Light a Prayer for Peace."
As we begin a new year and a new beginning in state government, my hope and prayer is that Alabama remains strong in our beliefs, our faith, and our values. Today, in a world caught up in nonsense and focused on a lot of wrong things, holding close our Alabama values is more important than ever before. I believe in our people and have hope that we can be a leader in today's society. I continue to keep families across Alabama in my prayers each and every day, and I am truly grateful to serve you as your governor. May you and your families stay safe and receive many blessings this season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and may God continue to bless each of you and the great state of Alabama. 3, 2, 1.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Next year, the Alabama House will have a new speaker pro tem, a new majority leader, and several new committee chairmen. But that's not all. There will also be a new House Clerk, the top staff official who runs the business of the House. I'm pleased to be joined by retiring House Clerk Jeff Woodard and incoming House Clerk John Treadwell. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I know it's been a tough job getting me to come on this show.
Well, we've talked about it for a while, and you know your retirement has been pending really all this year, and but now it's official. So let me just say congratulations on your retirement. 10 years as House Clerk, but many more in and around the House. Can you kind of talk about your career?
Yes, I started covering legislature as a reporter in 1978. My first session was the Lid Bill session that George Wallace had called, and it was a special session. And I went from a reporter on the Hill, and in 1991 went to work for House Speaker Jimmy Clark. And he called me in one day. I thought I was going in to do an interview, and I sat down, and his first words were, "When can you come work for me?" So it was kind of an interesting way to get thrown into the government situation. But I worked with him. I worked with his successor, Representative Seth Hammett, who was Speaker for several terms, and and then stayed until I was elected clerk in '91. So I've seen it from the press side, I've seen it from the leadership side, and was fortunate enough to also serve as clerk for some time. And as they say it, what a long, strange trip it was. I mean, but it was actually a very good experience. You learn a lot about people, a lot about life in general, and more than anything, you learn about the intricacies of government, on the legislative side anyway. So I had a good time. I'm very grateful to all the people that gave me these opportunities, and looking forward to some of my own opportunities now.
Putting your feet up, you deserve it. Well, Mr. Treadwell, congratulations to you as well. I know the official vote won't happen until the organizational session in January, correct. Right? Can you kind of talk about your background and experience leading up to this role?
Sure thing. I started out my legal practice in Morgantown, West Virginia, of all places. My wife was in a PhD program at West Virginia University, and so I began my legal career there in private practice, and then we moved back to Tallahassee, Florida. I'm originally from Florida. Was born in Dothan, Alabama, but originally from Florida, and moved back to Tallahassee and continued in private practice, and then had the opportunity to join the Senate Judiciary Committee with the state legislature there in Florida. And immediately I was kind of bitten by the legislative bug. It was a great experience. I loved it. Had a great experience there, and my wife had the opportunity. She is an Auburn alum. She had the opportunity to return back to Auburn University. She's a psychologist and worked for the university there. And so we moved to Auburn, and luckily things worked out. I was able to step into a legislative attorney role with the Legislative Reference Service back in 2011. I began working under Jerry Bassett and learning Alabama law and the Constitution, and drafting bills and doing legal research under him. And then when we became LSA in 2017, was tapped as the Deputy Director for the Legal Division under Othony Latham's leadership, and was able to work there and continue drafting bills and guiding legislative staff there. So been a great experience, and really enjoyed that there, and then had the opportunity to work under Jeff as assistant clerk for a year, and he was great in sharing information and guiding me, and just sitting back and watching him interact with members and work through the rules and give advice and in session in the chamber was a great experience for me, getting exposed to staff and how things operate, and then getting kind of a different take on the legislative process and seeing the member side of things was a great experience for me.
Mm-hmm. And people need to understand too that John, as a staffer for the Legislative Services Agency, was directly involved with all the rules negotiations that we were involved in for quite some time. I'd say last 4 or 5 years at least. Mm-hmm. And so he knows a lot about the what's behind the rules, why they're worded the way they are, mm-hmm. and the motivation for putting them where they are in the rule book. And so he knows a lot coming into the job.
Well, I was going to ask maybe both of y'all to talk about just the role of the clerk. A lot of our viewers may not be familiar with. They may see the legislature voting here and there and see staff there on the dais, but talk about the role of the clerk, not just in the House proceedings, but leading staff and just the role there.
Well, I can say that I know with the transition that's occurring right now, there's probably going to be some staff being shuffled around. So, but when I was there, we had 53 full-time employees and about 35 part-time employees. They keep the operation running behind the scenes. They they handle the committees, they handle printing of the calendars, putting the calendars together. They do constituent work for the members. It's amazing how much work the staff actually does. I tell you this, the staff, they work so hard, and a lot of people just don't understand when they're coming in at 6:37 in the morning, they're staying till 1 or 2 the next morning when we're in session sometimes. Sometimes when we're not in session, they're there till 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night when you're putting in 12, 14-hour days. It's not uncommon, and I have to just praise them for their commitment, because it's tough. And when you have families and they're trying to juggle all their family responsibilities while they're trying to do their job here at the State House. It's pretty tough sometimes. And we've got a couple staffers I know right now working on the new legislative information system. They're working on weekends, and they're putting in the hours it's going to take to get this thing going. But John knows more about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, there's this new legislative information system. Is that going to be up and running before next session?
Yeah, we should have that ready to go for the regular session, and I think it's going to be beneficial for staff. It's definitely going to assist LSA in the drafting process. I think it's going to be beneficial to the public as well in getting information and seeing what's actually going on from day to day in the House and the Senate, and it's going to help legislative staff as well in managing their daily task and documenting what's taking place on the floor, what's taking place in committee, moving bills through the process. It's all of that will be integrated together and should greatly assist how we work from day to day.
He mentioned staff, and it's always been my observation that we're kind of sparsely staffed. There's not a huge budget, I suppose, for the legislature. And I mean, coming from Florida, I would imagine other states are probably a little better staffed in terms of lawmakers having support staff and clerks and things.
No, you're exactly right, and that's one of the things that surprised me when I came from the Florida Senate here was the size of staff and what what staff accomplishes. In the Florida Senate, when I left, I think we had around 200 employees just for the Florida Senate.
Oh wow!
So to come to the downsized staff here, it was a big jump, and it was eye-opening for me. And that's what makes it all the more incredible of how hard staff works and what they accomplish and what they're doing behind the scenes from day to day that the public doesn't see, that sometimes even members don't see. That they're keeping this thing rolling and they're doing a great job.
Well, I mentioned at the top of the segment all the new elected leadership, right? New speaker pro tem, new majority leader, several new committee chairmen probably. That's just a big change, and you're going to be the new clerk. Is all that happening at once? Is that going to be a challenge for you?
I have to be honest and say definitely it will be a challenge. Things are going to be different, but I think everyone now is working hard to prepare and be ready to go and work through those changes. And one of the things I think Jeff mentioned was lining up staff and moving staff around. There's a big shuffle right now going on with staff and pairing staff with members and with committee chairmen. And once we land that process, then we'll hit the ground running and making sure everybody's prepared and ready to go. We'll be working with the new speaker and their staff and making sure we've got everything organized and up to date and up to speed. We're going to be doing a lot of training in the new Links program, making sure everybody's up to date on how that operates, and so that can move forward smoothly. So it is definitely going to be a challenge, definitely a lot of work, but I think everyone is up to the challenge and ready to go.
Well, the interesting thing about the legislature and the speaker, if folks are familiar with watching Congress, it's largely, formal, right? It's like kind of a pro forma position, especially legislatively, right, in the chamber. But here, the speaker is busy. That is a busy job, and I remember, speakers past have gone through training. I remember Mike Hubbard doing it. He went through weeks of training, and just to get ready for the role. Do you think that'll be necessary for Mr. Ledbetter as he becomes speaker for y'all to train and get on the same page as far as all the ins and outs?
Absolutely. We've already had conversations about working through some mock scenarios, doing some mock sessions, and having some outside assistance with that and working through those difficult situations. And everything is unpredictable on the floor. You can't always predict exactly how things are going to go, but to the best of our ability, being prepared to handle those situations. And he is, I think he's already planning for that and getting ready to go.
Well, the legislature is a political place. I mean, you can't divorce politics from what happens here, and yet the clerk has to be the neutral arbiter of the rules. Jeff, in your experience, has that been a challenge at times, especially when those tense moments when there's a lot riding on maybe a rule interpretation?
That is a challenge that exists every time you walk into the chamber.
Okay.
You never know what's coming your way, and some members are very, I guess you'd say, emotional and very committed to whatever their position is on a bill or a resolution, whatever it may be. And you've got to be ready to make the tough rulings that are going to make these people mad. You have to maintain a degree of independence, and that is sometimes very hard to do. And I was very fortunate, having been a reporter. It's like I'd almost been trained to be independent, so I didn't have to struggle too much with issue-oriented things when they would come up. I keep telling people the clerk does process, he doesn't do policy. So as long as I stayed as committed to the process as I could. And there were times, I have to admit, when I'd be sitting in that chair and I'd see a bill pass or an amendment would be adopted, and I'd want to shake my head real bad, but I just kind of had to be stone-faced.
Yeah.
But you have to be stone-faced and do your best to keep that neutrality as prevalent as you can.
But it's the like rulings on, okay, did they have enough votes for cloture, or was this amendment properly brought, or things like that. It's the little minutia things that really matter and maybe can be the success or failure of a bill, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the things that I was amazed in watching Jeff in last session and having that opportunity to learn under him, was seeing how quick he could respond to difficult questions and being ready, and that comes from experience, one, I think, but then knowing the rules and knowing Mason's manual, which is our backup for the rules that fills in the gaps that the rules actually don't cover. And then also being able to do that in a neutral manner, knowing that we serve the majority party, we serve the minority members as well, and being true to the rules to keep order in the chamber. And so I learned a lot from him, watching him maneuver through some difficult situations last session.
Now, one day I'll just get you to sit down and tell all your war stories.
Well, I'll tell you one. I had one member come up to me this some years back, and was not happy with the ruling I had made on the floor, and his final words to me were, "You need to start ruling more in favor of the majority party." And he was, I think, at least I took it as a very serious comment, and I went back to my office and closed the door and said to myself, "You got to be kidding." But that's the kind of thing you get confronted with, situations like that where because people they're very strong-willed and a lot of emotion about what they're doing, and especially if they're sponsor of a bill and things don't go their way. So,
well, I would imagine that's even more important in a supermajority. I mean, in the House there are going to be 77 Republicans. I mean, that's plenty of advantages there.
Right.
But if the staff is also seen to be leaning toward the majority, then that tips the scales. It's important to because then the Democrats don't trust you in terms of writing bills and things like that, right?
Well, John made a good point. You got to know the rules, and you got to be able to tell them what those rules say. Now, the bottom line is, we can advise leadership on rules all day long, but it's up to them as to whether they want to listen to us, and that is something that we have no control over. But we do our best to explain things the way they are.
Meaning you're going to give your advice based on the rules to the chair, but the speaker still has the chair. He has the gavel.
And and the rules are designed to in Alabama to vest a lot of power in the speaker. So he has that authority to modify things. Sometimes they go. The speaker will just go and do kind of what they want to do on some procedural thing, and if it's not going to cause a lot of problem or there's not a lot of political ramifications to it, then it's not a problem. But you just hope that they stick to what the rules demand that they do, and most of them do. Don't get me wrong. Most of them are very good. That I've worked with have been very good about. If I have to turn around and tell them, hey, we can't do that. We have to do this. Then they've been real good about making sure we do what the rules ask for.
I remember years ago as a staffer, you told me, no sitting in the chairs. So, so I remember taking some of that admonishment. It's going to be really interesting when the new legislature meets. We'll see if there are special sessions. Of course, the regulars in March, just all the new faces, new staff, new committee chairs. It's going to be interesting. I wanted to switch gears real quick and talk about a topic that is really interesting here lately, and that is the possibility of a new state house. The Legislative Council took action, I guess, a month ago or so, to start conversations with RSA about, looking at the possibility of a new building. Of course, this has been on the wish list for decades. But could y'all talk about, I know it's not y'all's call whether or not we build a new state house, but just sort of the need for it and the history of this building and why that's necessary?
Well, I will say this to the people of Alabama. A new state house needs to be built. The public access issue that exists right now is absolutely horrible. We have committee rooms that are not big enough to handle the crowds that come to witness these committee meetings. And you've got people who are driving from Huntsville, or they're driving up from Mobile or Dothan, wherever they're coming from, and they've taken time, a lot of them take off work, and they come up here and they expect to be able to walk into the committee and have some input into that debate on the bill, or at least witness what's going on. And we have so many times, I'd say every week, we have situations where the public, we have to turn them away because the fire marshals told us you can only have so many people in the room. And so we have to tell them, sorry, we can't let you in. Well, to me, that's unconscionable. I mean, we need to have better facilities so the public can witness the process and be more involved in it. And right now, it's just totally inadequate. We've also got health issues. You know, we've found lots of mold in here, and that's not good for anybody, whether it's the public, the staff, you know, legislators. It's just, that's an issue that we can't do much about. It's an old building, and we're all constantly fighting these issues. Public access to me is the biggest. And also, the state house we're in now is built as a temporary facility, and then it became a permanent facility. And because they all had offices, and I think they liked having the offices, so they stayed here. The problem you had with that is the functionality, even inside the chamber, the House chamber itself, it's just not designed to be able to handle a legislative body. You can barely move around in the chamber, and if you have to go behind a member, I mean, you're squeezing yourself between their chair and the desk, and of course, a lot of people are probably saying, well, that's good for legislators. They need to be, you know, put through that sort of thing. But what it's doing is it's restricting communication on the floor. And so situations like that also need to be addressed so that they can come up with a better workable chamber and committee rooms.
Do you think a new state house would also be conducive for better staff morale, you know, just legislative work?
I definitely think it would be better for staff morale, and it would enhance staff morale. And one of the struggles that I'm seeing right now is we're just running out of space, and so we're trying to move staff around and figure out where to put people so that they can function appropriately. And we're also in the process, the legislature is assigning office space for members, and with 105 members, trying to maneuver through that when we have limited space or space that's not functioning, or space where we've had leaks or other issues with heating and cooling in those spaces. There are just a lot of hurdles to jump over in utilizing the space that we have, and so a new state house would definitely move us in the right direction in remedying some of that.
Well, we'll see. It's probably several years away, but it certainly is needed, and all we ask is that we can keep our studio here in the basement because it's really convenient. Well, gentlemen, thanks again. Congratulations to you both, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
It's great to be with you.
All right. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Kenneth Boswell, Director of the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. Mr. Boswell, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
I wanted to have you on partly because I wanted to talk about this issue of electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. I know that Governor Ivey recently awarded, I think it's $2.4 million in grants. This is for building electric vehicle charging stations. Your agency, ADECA, will obviously be in charge of dispersing this money. So tell me why and how the state is involved in developing this electric vehicle infrastructure.
The primary purpose of it is to make sure that we're doing everything we can do as a state to make sure that we're supporting manufacturers, Mercedes, Hyundai. With these dollars, we're trying to cut down on range anxiety issues for those people that may be either considering buying an EV or either has purchased an EV or for those travelers that are going from point A to point B in the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Range anxiety, meaning, okay, if I'm in the market for a car and I know that, man, I want to go to the beach or I want to go to here, I'm considering, well, how far can I get? And if I know that there's a system of a network of charging stations, maybe I'm more likely to buy that electric vehicle.
Absolutely, and think of it like gas stations, if you will. You don't have a problem getting into a combustible automated car, and right now, if you get an EV, you have to literally make sure that you plan your trip so that you will have the appropriate fuel to get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen just over the years, and here recently, we've seen a lot of charging stations along Alabama's interstates, right?
Correct.
That's primarily, when you look at the maps of where things are going, it's typically on 85, 65, 459, 59, 20. But this round of grants is focused more on the highways rather than the interstates. Why is that?
They're primarily state dollars that we're deploying right now, and it's like gas stations. As my former job being a mayor of the city of Enterprise, we wanted to make sure that we captured all of those dollars that were flowing through our city. We want those people to stop at our service stations and not only buy gas, but also now electricity.
Mm-hmm.
But we also wanted to make sure that we captured as many of those tax dollars that we could as buying Cokes and refreshments and things along the way. All that being said, we are primarily focusing on the state dollars with state highways, county roads, and municipal roads.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Alabama towns that aren't along interstates.
Right.
Think about Enterprise or the entire Wiregrass if you think
Correct.
about it. So why should they be at a disadvantage when it comes to these charging stations?
Absolutely, and that is the reason that we're taking those state dollars and concentrating in those areas. Now, we will have, and we already have, the first 2 rounds of funding from the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund, otherwise known as NEVI. There's $79 million allocated to the state of Alabama by formula over the next 5 years. Now, we've gotten the first 2 rounds allocated from the federal government, and we are awaiting, as probably as you find this of no surprise, the actual rules and regulations to how those dollars are to be deployed. But those dollars are primarily focused on the interstate areas of the state.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's always rules and regulations
Always
when it comes
rules
to
and regulations.
You know
no
better than
doubt.
anybody. So I was driving to Atlanta for Thanksgiving the other day,
Mm-hmm.
and we stopped at the rest area, I guess right across the Georgia line. I guess it's their welcome station.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, parked right next to us was a car that was charging. They had a charging station there, a couple of them, I think. And so I finally have seen one of these,
Yep.
kind of out in the wild. His family was charging, and that seemed like a novel idea at the rest areas. Might we see that in Alabama, a network of rest area charging stations? I realize you're not DOT director,
Sure.
but is that something that's...
There's a possibility. Anything's possible in the future, but right now we're primarily focusing on the areas where people have access 24 hours a day, has the ability to shop, and has restroom facilities, and it is well lit. So we're primarily focusing on stores along the along the interstate, and making sure that they have accessibility and have the ability to be able to charge the cars.
Mm-hmm. Well, switching gears real quick, I know another key initiative that ADECA is involved in is broadband expansion,
Yes.
expansion of broadband internet into rural areas specifically. So it was just a few months ago, September, Governor Ivey awarded this $82.5 million grant. This is for a statewide middle mile broadband project. It was the big announcement up in Pine Level, I guess.
Yes.
Talk to us about middle mile, how it is key in helping extend broadband into those rural areas.
Sure. Let me first try to describe to you broadband and how the deployment of broadband goes. Think of it like the highway system. You have the internet, you have the interstate. That would be your dark fiber and your redundant fiber. And then you have the middle mile, which is your state highways.
Okay.
that actually hooks the accessibility up from the dark fiber. And then you have the state road, or the county and municipal roads, which is the last mile. We wanted to focus primarily on the middle mile with the ARPA dollars that was set aside to make sure that the internet service providers have access and has the ability to deploy the last mile quicker. Middle mile is known as the most expensive mile. And with that, we wanted to do everything that we could do to make sure that we can get the rural areas of the state lit up as soon as possible.
So this 82.5, that goes to build that's beyond the interstate, it's the state highways. I mean, that's a great metaphor because everybody's familiar with that. You get off, you can't get to the town without just by the interstate. You've got to have the
go through a state road, county road, or municipal road.
Okay. Well, I know that broadband has been going on. This issue has been around for some time. ADECA has been involved in it. Your entire service there. And I imagine we'll see it into this next term coming up. How would you rate Alabama's progress so far in terms of deploying internet and planning for it compared to other states?
Very steady and progressive. Would tell you since 2017 when Governor Ivey actually hired me. This has been one of her pillars, that she wanted to make sure that citizens had accessibility to internet. And so this is not a sprint, it's a journey, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And while I have you, I know that you talked about ARPA.
Mm-hmm.
Broadband was a huge part of ARPA round one. We've got another round coming next year. I know you're not in the legislature. The legislature's going to have to deal with that. But do you think there's a need there to go beyond what was allocated this past time to use some of these ARPA 2 monies to, again, address some of the rural broadband issues?
I do. I think it would be a wise decision of the legislature to be able to look at that in a serious note and making sure that our rural areas have the accessibility and, if you will, making it even playing field for both rural and metropolitan and urban.
Well, yeah, we've been talking to folks in the healthcare industry, folks in the education field about it's not just being able to access the internet for shopping on Cyber Monday, as you will, but for serious issues like healthcare, like education. So it's not a small issue. Well, we're out of time, Mr. Boswell, but again, thanks for coming on Capital Journal to talk about some of these issues.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by David Mowery, chairman of the Mowery Consulting Group. Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
I've been wanting to have you on because the dust has now finally settled on this election. I mean, it's, a little less than a month ago. Not quite all the dust. I guess we still have Georgia, and we'll get to that. But I wanted to get your take on a few things, just reaction from the campaigns. We can start here in Alabama, where Republicans really dominated up and down the ballot. Meanwhile, Democrats kind of struggled to even field candidates in all races. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's almost like I saw that the Libertarians kind of seem to have as much or more going on as the Democrats, and I think in some cases got more votes than the Democrat challengers did. And, I think it's just one of those things that, look, in Alabama they have a brand problem. Like, people just don't, the brand is anathema to them. And so they're kind of like, there's way higher hurdles to get over than just the policies, which people don't agree with either. And so it's almost like, they're getting relegated to, I don't want to say minor party status, but in terms of contesting statewide elections and contesting sort of what we would term close, say, state Senate or state House races, I mean, it's almost impossible unless you have a situation like the Ensler thing where the demographics had moved to where, I believe that's the case there, where the demographics has moved to where, like, the Democrat has a chance to win. And I'm really thinking of that race in Huntsville. And there are several of them.
Yeah,
and,
there are a couple of them.
And it's funny because down here, we don't get a lot of news from Huntsville, right? It's just kind of like up there, you know, and it's like, oh, I hear this. And I know that there was a lot of talk even among Republicans that they were a little bit worried about Tom Butler. And then he won by like 11, right?
Yeah, he ran away with
it.
it.
It wasn't close. And so I think that they just have a really bad problem with people not identifying with the brand. It's almost like you could win as a Republican on other issues than the normal red meat, but if you were as conservative as some of the Republicans but had the D next to your name, you're going to lose.
Yeah, what makes that interesting is that in other states, take Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, the Democrats are competitive for those middle-class suburban voters. Maybe not winning them all the time, but they're competitive for them. Here, it's not. That's gone. So I wonder how they get back to being competitive for those voters.
That's a question maybe above our pay grade.
Yeah, probably.
But I do think that it has a lot to do. I think that if you look at those states, I do think it has a lot to do with demographics, not necessarily size, and not necessarily even the split of the race, nationality, male, female, or anything. And I think it has to do with literally what you're talking about, the suburban voter. How many suburbs do we really have?
Yeah.
You know, we don't have Jefferson County, Birmingham is big, but in some ways you almost don't think of, except for some of those certain collar communities, as a suburb like the place that I'm from, Peachtree City, Georgia, which is like a, you know,
Atlanta's Atlanta.
It exists because people move there and need a place to live that has good schools and yada, yada, yada. And so we just don't necessarily have that. And we also don't have the influx of just new people, whether they be from out of the country or just from other states.
Sure. Well, speaking of other states, let's zoom out a little bit, look at the national landscape. Republicans came away pretty disappointed.
Yeah.
After expecting, being promised this red wave. What happened?
You know, that's a good question, and I know that that even the RNC is asking that because, you know, our she's not our senator yet, but
Senator-elect.
soon to be our senator-elect Katie Britt was appointed to some kind of review board about sort of what they did right, what they did wrong. And, you know, I think that it's funny because a lot of times we look for like a global answer, and then really the answer is more granular than that. And what I mean is that, like, I bought into the red wave thing because we had a generational candidate in Katie Britt that is like so dynamic that you would think that, okay, this is the type of person that the Republicans are fielding, and that's the type of person that wins Senate seats. But you know what? If you look at the candidates on the other side, especially specific to those states, none of them has the type of profile or the type of ability that she has. And what I mean by that is, like, let's take Pennsylvania, right?
Dr. Oz.
I mean, not only that, but okay, so Fetterman is like, you know, but, you know, he's like I guess he's like a lovable goof or something maybe, but he doesn't seem that lovable. He's kind of...
Well, and not to make, not making light of his
right,
stroke,
health issue.
His stroke, but it's a pretty serious thing, and so I thought maybe early voting had a lot to do with that, where they had that debate, which was a terrible performance for Fetterman, but it was after early voting. I think it already concluded, so they probably banked so many votes before that bad.
And then I saw something though that said that, and I would have to. You know, I'm not sure if I believe it, right? But they had, I think it was Fetterman's pollster, said that everybody said that it was an awful debate, but among people who actually watched the debate, more people moved to Fetterman than away from him.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of wild. You know, the other thing, though, is that when you come to something like that, it's like the hurdle to get over is low because they're accusing of being like him of being a vegetable, essentially. Sure. And then when he shows up and can say 3 sentences,
doesn't fall over,
maybe not 4,
right.
But you know,
yeah.
And so I think that the other thing there is, the hot take there is, the Democrats were able to turn Dr. Oz into the absolute worst thing you can be in Pennsylvania, a New Jerseyan. and I truly, I don't think that it had as much to do with issues as it had to do with like things like that, and the fact that, like, you know, how is that guy going to go to Allentown or whatever, you know? And so, and I think that that's a big problem. Fetterman plays in the sticks. and that's really Arizona's an interesting one because I thought that Carrie Lake, the governor, that's the governor's race, different than Senate, but I thought she was a pretty dynamic candidate, and I really kind of thought
came close to winning.
I really thought that they might have the effect that Georgia might get, and that I thought that Lake might win, but that Mark Kelly would win because look for him to run for president. I mean, like he's an astronaut. He's like won in a very contested state, that type of thing. And the interesting thing is that I know this because I had a conversation with somebody involved, sort of at not in the partisan level anyway, but they were saying, look at what happens with the Democrats. They might get their bench just decimated. They thought Whitmer would lose. They thought certain other things. But, now all those folks won. And you've already seen a guy like Tom Cotton say, hey, I'm not running for president. And so it's like the interesting thing to me is like the follow-on effects of that.
Yeah, sure.
As for what happened, I think that candidate quality and state-specific races had more to do with it in the Senate than, say, red wave, blue wave. And House races are, who the heck knows what goes on in House races?
Well, yeah, they were expecting. I mean, I was hearing people talk about 50 seats. They're barely going to scrape through with a majority. But this also leads to my next question about Donald Trump. I mean, you hear a lot of talk about Trumpism, MAGA really not delivering. Maybe a big turnoff to those independent voters that could go either way. That you really need them to turn out. So, I mean, what do you think? Does Donald Trump well, and then a week after the election he announces he's running for president, but do you think Trump, in the wake of this election, still holds sway over the Republican Party, or do you think it's beginning to wane a little bit?
I think he's a little bit like they used to say about Joe Reed, in that he can't make you win, but he probably can make you lose. You know what I mean? And that you have to have, there's a good core of those voters that you kind of have to like get over a bar for, and I think it's probably a majority of the of the primary, but it's not like the only thing. And I think that if that becomes the only thing, it then becomes problematic. It's almost like it's like a high wire act, right? You have to be enough of it. You have to be enough in the Trump camp and enough sort of identify with MAGA or however you want to say that.
Right.
But then you also have to pivot a little bit. You can't, and look at this conversation over Thanksgiving. Not that we talk politics at Thanksgiving at my house, but it was just mainly that, like, take Georgia, right? They tried to make, and even take Arizona, they tried to make everything about like the stolen election, but man, you and me know this, a month is an eternity in politics. So 2 years and trying to keep that going and all that is like almost impossible.
Yeah.
And so, because it's like what I'm surprised at though is the economic metrics, and I think that was driving the gas prices, that type of thing over the summer was driving a lot of that dissatisfaction. And I think that, I don't know that it's better, but it hasn't gotten worse. And so, like, I think that might have something to do with it.
Yeah,
who knows, man?
I agree with that, though. I think you make a great point about inflation, gas prices. I mean, Republicans had a lot of advantages going into the unpopular president, a lot of historical advantages, and still came up short. And a lot of talk about, a lot of candidates seemed chaotic, still talking about stolen elections and stuff like that. While I've got you, real quick. Georgia votes on Tuesday. I guess they've been voting for a while with early voting. It's a big race. It's not going to decide the Senate, but it will be decisive in terms of 51 versus 50 Democratic seats. What dynamics are you looking at ahead of Tuesday?
Well, speaking of chaotic candidates, you got to figure that the thing with Herschel is that like Kemp won by like 9 points, and he got pushed, and Herschel got pushed into a runoff, and so that tells me that like 9 to 10% of Georgians who would probably vote for the Republican candidate think that Walker's unqualified. And that's the thing. They don't care about the issues. They think, I had a very senior Georgia Republican tell me that the problem is that the perception of voters in Georgia is that Herschel Walker is just like can't do the job. And they're worried about him embarrassing the state because of the way that he's campaigning. I mean, I saw a thing yesterday that said that somebody on his own staff is saying he's a pathological liar.
Oh, no.
And you know when that stuff comes out, it's like, now watch, we'll say all this and it'll win. But, dynamics I'm looking for is turnout in the sort of the northern arc and the southern arc, like, Macon kind of thing, Savannah, versus large urban core turnout.
Yeah.
And that's the, and I think that, you can follow those trackers or whatever, and they can tell you where people are at. But, and then it's just, this is cliche, but we always say it, but it's overall turnout. What's the overall number, and like how many of that comes from Atlanta, how many of that comes from somewhere else?
Sure. Like you said, candidate quality matters.
It does.
Well, we're out of time, but Dave, thanks again for coming on the show.
That was quick, but it was fun.
We'll have you back again.
Anytime.
We'll be right back.
Originally designated as a postal route in 1806, the old federal road stretched through the Creek Indian Territory of Lower Alabama. Alabama's federal road functioned as a major thoroughfare for western migration into the Old Southwest, ushering in a new era of national expansion and exploitation of Native American territory. Although much of the federal road has disappeared, portions of it remain today.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. Capitol Journal will return Friday night at 7:30 right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.